Very good morning, good evening. Uh, we are about 6 hours, no, about maybe 8 hours past spring equinox, and it's Nowruz season in Azerbaijan and in many other parts of the world. Good to see many of you joining. And today we have a guest whom I wanted to interview for some time, Shujaat Ahmadzada, and he is here now. So this is Garden Chat number 16, where I am joined by, there he is, Shujaat Ahmadzada. How are you doing?
Hey, um,
Great. Happy
do you
Nowruz,
hear
by
me?
the way. Happy Nowruz season,
Yeah, thank you.
of course.
Thank you. Do you hear
And
me?
thank you. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
So Shujaat, you're a independent researcher. You've been involved with sort of the Caucasus groups, and why don't you maybe say a few words about your education and sort of the kind of things you research, you focus on.
Thanks much, Arnold, and thanks for the Bright Garden Voices team for invitation. It's a pleasure to speak with to your audience. So I'm Shujaat. I've been acting as non-affiliated researcher, focus on the foreign and security policy of the Caucasus countries, with a specific focus on Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict dimension for the past few years. Um, I have also background in project management, in conflict transformation, in teaching and conflict analysis. So I do some uh, editorial pieces, which is kind of intersection of the many things that related to Armenia, Azerbaijan. Also do sort of academic research on nation building, history, and nationalism in the South Caucasus.
Wonderful. And you've been involved with various programs, right? I mean, some of them involving youth,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, also for my, as in my project management background, also tied up with uh, overseeing youth projects across 12 countries. I have also experience in managing and facilitating Armenia-Azerbaijan dialogue events, as well as intra-Afghan dialogue talks in the past. Not anymore, but in the past, I did that as well.
Wonderful, wonderful, and thank you again for making time for today and joining us. I for some reason did not realize it's Nowruz holiday season, and uh, to all the beautiful people joining right now, we are at our garden chat number 16 with Shujaat Ahmadzada, and we are starting our questions now. So let's start from the root, your roots. You have a very interesting family background. Your father is actually from Agdam in Karabakh,
Yeah.
and your mother is from Georgia. So I was wondering how these might have impacted your views on the region, on things relating to borders and ethnicity. Maybe a few words you want to say on this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, these two areas are very displaced in the past. One still, fortunately, where there was a bicommunal and polyethnic life on a daily basis. So, in a daily encounters, you would see different ethnicities, cultures, and different backgrounds, people with different cultural backgrounds in your just one daily encounters. In Agdam, obviously, this happened with Armenians from Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, as in the closest city to Agdam was Askaran, and these two towns, cities were kind of areas that had a lot of interaction with each other. People from Askaran, not only Askaran, but many parts of Nagorno-Karabakh traveled to Agdam for getting their stuff that they need daily on a daily basis, as Aghdam had one of the largest markets in whole Karabakh, not if not in whole Azerbaijan, besides
Mhm.
of Baku, obviously. And a lot of people travel from Aghdam to deep inside of Karabakh, especially during the summer times when, for example, my father used to travel to Lachin, that where they had some pastoral lands, and to pass to Lachin, they had to go through the all Armenian settled parts of Karabakh, includes Askeran and other parts. So there was a lot of daily interactions, daily, monthly, and yearly. So obviously there was a family relations between the parts of between our families and also family from and from Nagorno-Karabakh. From Georgia, however, I mean, there is the bicommunal life where still between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. So what is interesting here there is that in Krimokartli, which is the the southernmost part of Georgia, there is more intercommunal interactions between Armenians and Azerbaijanis than Azerbaijanis and Georgians. As in, if you look at the map, then you have Armenian village and Azerbaijani village, pretty much akin to a pre-Karabakh conflict landscape of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So you have Armenian and Azerbaijani village interacting with each other, cohabiting in a one space. So they share a lot in common. And one of the places I think that is where this intercommunal exchange is quite visible is markets, obviously. So if you go to the Marneuli market, for example, not sure if you've been to ever, but the ones been to would surely confirm the fact that when you go to Marneuli, which is the kind of hub in itself there, you would see Armenians, Greeks, Georgians speaking Azerbaijani because the town is largely Azerbaijani populated. And the lingua franca in itself is becoming a sort of a imaginary bond between the people across the divide, across the ethnic divide. So that is where they meet, where they trade, and where they interact with each other. So in Georgia, this is still the case. Armenians and Azerbaijanis continue to live side by side. So there are a number of examples, informal villages such as Khojorni and Sopi, where there's not only coexistence in one state, but there's also coexistence within the one village. So Sopi and Khojorni are two areas where Armenian and Azerbaijanis live within the one village, where they share the one village space. Of course, I think this is the reason why, and these are the reasons why that I found myself in this community, and I think this is what shaped what I'm doing right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Shujat, is your sound is a bit sharp. I'm not sure if it's my speakers maybe, or is it AirPods, but it's understandable. It's
Is it better now?
well, can you speak a bit more?
Is it better now? Are
I
you?
believe so.
Is it internet
Yes,
connection problem?
I believe
Okay,
it's better.
okay.
Maybe it's my internet. So
Yeah.
okay, okay. Diego says it sounds okay. Wonderful. And I believe you touched upon this, but now Agdam is in ruins, of course. Anyone who goes back there probably will have a hard time figuring out their street, their house, anything like that. So I was wondering if there's anything your father recalled that was sort of that stayed with you about life or war regarding Agdam.
So yeah, for my father is originally from the village of the district. So he is not from the city itself.
Oh, okay.
And the village was not under the Armenian control until 2020. So it was under Azerbaijani control, though it was on the front line. So the front line, the pre-2020 front line passed just across the village. I mean, along the pastoral lands around the village. From where the city was visible to a certain degree, if you woke up around 7 a.m. in the morning with a clear sky, you could see the city and its ruins from a distance. But from the wartime, let's say memories, if there are any, I think the ones that I've heard um, was were about, say, displacement, though it was short in terms of the duration, because after the offensive into the district, most people, even though not necessarily falling under direct control, but many others also fled from many parts of the district, obviously. The biggest, of course, the remnant of that time is that how displacement, even though it was short in duration, caused a lot of communal hardships and also individual hardships for a family that lost their many belongings, physical and also non-physical ones, throughout this displacement period, where when they were forced to live in parts of Azerbaijan that were largely bereft of things that they had in Aghdam, and also how these economic hardships came along the way during that time, um, but also mm, how they were trying to help others. I mean, the ones especially they lost their properties during the war, so they could be settled down. Of course, the war is never remembered with positive terms. So it was all in all. I mean, if you just ask an ordinary person, what would be the three words that you would describe the war? I think that would be chaos, anarchy, um, I mean, fear, the other kind of negative connotations, any kind of negative connotations. So obviously, this kind of are the memories that are there. But our family got never physically displaced from their homes. They loss of control to their life, to their properties, but it was a bit of short-term relocation to Baku and parts of other parts of Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and I imagine Ardahan would have been an economic hub or where people go to buy things, trade, resources. So, and we're gonna come back to this sort of topic of people living in the borderlands, conflict zones. So wonderful. People just joining. We are joined by Shujaat Ahmadzada, and we will be doing a Q&A session at the end in maybe about 30 to 40 minutes. So there is a question sort of button there under the screen. There's this comment symbol and a question sign. You can click on that and submit your questions, and in the end I will try to get to your questions. All right, moving on. So between 94 and 2020, were there any missed opportunities between Azerbaijan and Armenia to reach an agreement on of course, on what was mainly the Karabakh issue, right? The Nagorno-Karabakh. And how difficult would it have been given popular sentiments, post-war rhetoric, all this trauma? What would it have taken leaders to be able to achieve that?
I think, yeah, it's an interesting question. So if we are speaking of meta factors that made Armenian Azerbaijan, eventual Armenian Azerbaijan a peace deal in pre-2020 setting possible, then speaking of some, I think if there was a period, if there was any period, that period was in the mid 1990s, to be more precise, from 995 till 999, when there was a lot of things that made Armenian Azerbaijan peace possible. The first, I think, that it was the fact that there was a large, um, wider societal war fatigue on both ends. Though, of course, there was asymmetrical dynamics in terms of the how war's results got perceived. In Armenia, it was a obviously victory. In Azerbaijan, it was the humiliating defeat. So, in both countries, because of the human toll of the conflict, including displacement, including loss of life, and many others, economic hardships, there was a war fatigue on both ends. The second is the memory of, and I mean, daily coexistence was a distant past. It was relative. It was not a distant past. So it was it's something that happened a few years ago. Until let's say 990s, there was a daily coexistence between Armenian and Azerbaijanis in Armenia or in Azerbaijan. So it was not something that happened 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 30 years ago. It was just a generation that had their Armenian or Azerbaijani neighbors. All of a sudden, some bad things happened, just to use simple terms, and there was a possibility of the things getting reversed. And third, most important, I think, meta factor was the fact that geopolitical environment was quite conducive for such eventual peace deal, because it was a time when, as Fukuyama called it, was the end of the history. So the Cold War ended, multilateral institutions emerged as a result of this Cold War chapter's closure, where internationally facilitated proposals have made their ways into different conflict settings, including Northern Ireland, Bosnia Herzegovina, and others. And OSCE, which was tasked to mediate Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, came up with proposals that tried to close the asymmetrical relationship between the parties on the ground by proposing that, for example, Armenia would return 7 surrounding regions, and in return, there would be multinational peacekeeping force for Nagorno-Karabakh, and also there would be very high level autonomy, territorial autonomy for Nagorno-Karabakh inside of Azerbaijan. So there was a modus operandi that was envisioned by almost every single major global and regional power, be it US, Europe, Russia, Turkey, and other Iran. There was a diplomatic push for that. So there was a lot of shuttle diplomacy efforts, not necessarily from the Westerners, but also from the locals, as in to think of many different options and to discuss them. And there was a direct contact between the leaderships. Unfortunately, this opportunity got missed. And after that, we never ever had this kind of opportunity because of the many reasons. The one is a new generation of people grew up with no direct and daily memory of coexistence. The second is geopolitical environment became less conducive with increased polarity between the confrontation between the West and the rest, including most specifically Russia, which concerns Azerbaijan and Armenia. The third is there became an Armenia-Azerbaijan fatigue for international mediators. I mean, there was no shuttle diplomacy. It was just a long-term, lengthy negotiations that everyone said that okay, that's a new normalcy. We don't know. We know that we will be not. We're not going to achieve anything anytime soon, but we're doing it for the sake of just keeping the process. So that became a normalcy, especially after 2010s, with increased militarization, with increased antagonism, with increased geopolitical confrontation between the different geopolitical ends. We had almost a practical impossibility of achieving peace in Armenian and Azerbaijani context. Peace here, of course, practically meant OSCE Minsk proposals, most recently Madrid principles of 2007, 2008. And I think that was the only time, I mean, the mid-90s were the only time when there was a really high chance for Armenia, Azerbaijan to get a multifaceted, comprehensive peace deal. Perhaps the other time that we could speak of was in to a certain degree in 2021, 2022-ish period when but the biggest difference from the previous time was that there was a geopolitical confrontation, and the second most improbable, there was a huge antagonism between the societies. And the November 10th deal showed that any kind of top imposed deal would be quite problematic unless societal buy-in is achieved. So from that perspective, I would still stick to my first point, my argument that the most conducive period for comprehensive neoliberal way of a neoliberally crafted, let's say, Armenian-Azerbaijani deal was possible in the mid-90s.
Not uncommon. I mean, in conflicts, when it's happening and when it has just happened, there's this shock element. And then we give meaning to suffering, meaning to victory and defeat in quotes. And then a new generation grows up with those sort of centralized narratives. So, and of course, Azerbaijan became richer, right? And and Armenia was not, I guess, ready to sort of compromise on the new narratives it gave itself, the Armenians. Uh, and which leads to my next question is that how would you characterize the power dynamics between Azerbaijan and Armenia since the 2020 war? And how can we identify the main strategies, if any, that the two sides have adopted to navigate the new situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a one conceptual problem is that even though we usually divide Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict into two large periods, one is pre-2020, the other one is post-2020. In itself, post-2020, it still should be divided into many different periods because March of 2021 is quite different from the March of 2025. Though these two time slots do fall under the one that's a large group of post-2020. So I think the one war ended in 2020 until the Russian-Ukrainian war began in 2022 February. The major strategy of Azerbaijan was to make sure that November 10th agreements and its results are cemented in a way that Azerbaijan's victory is cemented in a way that it is a legally binding new system. I think till 2022 February, Azerbaijan was largely relying on a long-term realization of its national goal of let's say establishing control over whole Karabakh. But whereas Armenia was more of like trying to see whether and how November 10th agreements modalities could be, if could be negotiated, renegotiated, and how. And to do so, it needs support of whom? Either Russia or possibly other actors, so they could just come in and fill the gap. That's a vacuum created by November 10th agreement. But I think after 2022 Russian-Ukrainian war began, calculus of Armenia and Azerbaijan changed rapidly. And in terms of, especially on the behalf of Azerbaijan, I think there was an understanding that November 10th structure as a concept wise is not workable anymore and unattainable. So there should be a processual shift from November 10th, November 10th statement, which include a lot of things. One was obviously the first was effectively latching corridor as a concept became no more. The second, in September 2023, so November 10th agreement was made of four, let's say, parts. The one was there should be a Nagorno-Karabakh within its 1988 NKAO borders, with exception of some parts in southern parts, and there should be effective Russian protectorate over that. The third should be kind of functioning corridor that would connect NKO with Armenia, and a fourth would be sort of similar, not exactly the same modus operandi, again under Russian control in the south of Armenia to sweeten the deal with Azerbaijan. So three of them mattered Azerbaijan more than Armenia. The last one mattered Armenia more than Azerbaijan. And what happened after 2022 Russian-Ukrainian war was that this first phase got dismantled within the time of within the period of one year almost. So we had first Latin corridor becoming no more as a concept wise. Then we had obviously in September 2023 Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan established control over the Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, it's within, I mean, here it is administrative boundaries. And the third was the Russian peacekeepers, which were sent to Russia, back to Russia. I mean, this process got completed in June 2024. So all three elements of November 10th statement became nothing but a thing of past. What is remaining is only the last one, which was this fourth element, that is how to envision a connectivity between Armenia, Azerbaijan's western districts with Nakhchivan. Though I think this November 10th way of envisioning it has also become a thing of past, largely because also on obvious reasons and quite understandably, Armenia doesn't want to have this modus operandi um, getting realized in its territory. So what we have now is that eventually at the very in where we stand as of today is that in 2025 Armenia and Azerbaijan does not have a conflict management system that was built supposedly around November 10th agreement. Obviously, process-wise, when you don't have one, you should replace it with another one. And the another one is not coming so far, and we'll see whether the new conflict management system will emerge or not.
Thank you for the answer. To whoever's been joining recently, we are joined by Shujaat Ahmadzada, discussing his background, his thoughts on the conflict, and some ideas he would have to move things forward. So, for the majority of the past 3 decades, the conflict has been centered on Karabakh, on Nagorno-Karabakh, and in September 2023, I believe the sort of Armenian presence came to an end, and that shifted uh, sort of aspects of the conflict. But I mean, even before that, expanded to it had expanded to include other things. I mean, things to do with corridors, etc. But this, of course, was, especially from an Armenian perspective, a very major development, a very, very traumatic one. So it took this core element that used to be the root cause of the conflict out of the Armenian-Azerbaijani relations. And recently, this month, we're seeing yet another sort of we're hearing public statements about the prospect of a new peace deal being signed, etc. And I was wondering, what is the likelihood, in your opinion, that the two sides can reach a durable agreement for in the near future? And what would the demands be, and what is stalling the process?
Obviously, the peace agreement that has been completed in negotiations was something that was happening between the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So that was the one track. And obviously, as you know, you don't have a peace treaty draft text available on internet. But we could both agree that even though we don't have this piece of paper at our hands, by just Googling internationally accepted peace treaties, so far, we could just create a one, even without going into specifics, because I believe that the would-be peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be quite ambiguous in its terms. It will be largely Armenia and Azerbaijan committing to certain meta principles, such as respecting each other's territorial integrity, doing X, Y, not in a way that one would expect as if a recipe for all problems. So this is the only one track. that happened between Azerbaijan's and Armenia's foreign ministers, and that got concluded. What is continuing is the other thing. So there is this another track that is happening under Deputy Prime Ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan, and they are tasked to demarcate Armenian-Azerbaijani border. And it's essentially a border making process, and the border making process between the two armed rivals that have a past of 2 or 3 major wars, that have a past of intercommunal antagonism, a huge displacement, and a very tragic collective memory. And a border making in the place that, on a very micro level, in a geographical landscape, in in certain specific locations, it is almost impossible, which is almost impossible. Why? What I'm referring to this high mountains range that are located on the Armenian-Azerbaijan border. So there is this process happening, but we should be aware that there will be. I mean, I don't want to predict anything. Perhaps there could be something good out of it, but I expect Armenian-Azerbaijani border demarcation taking years, if not decades, for both obvious objective reasons and also for other reasons. The objective reason is that it is really hard to demarcate the border. For Azerbaijani Russian borders to be demarcated, I mean, delimited as well, it took like 2 decades of negotiations, which included also at the end population and territorial exchange to large degree. Armenian as Georgian border still not got completed. Azerbaijani Georgian border still not got completed. And just imagine Azerbaijan's border with Armenia is the longest border for Armenia, and the second longest for Azerbaijan. And it passed through, it's like 30% of it are inhabited by both sides, which in itself means a lot of micro problems, micro disputes to emerge, given these borders were devised and crafted when there was no understanding of 2 separate states. It was just a one political entity, political union, and you have 2 separate states with a history of the armed conflict, with open, let's say, traumas, and now they have to rebuild whole new system of relationship, also on the micro level on the borderlands. It will take decades. What is important, I think for me personally, is that we have to make sure is that Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict not transforming from ethno-territorial dispute over um, um, sort of a disputed land of Nagorno-Karabakh into borderized interstate rivalry, akin to Pakistan and China, Pakistan, India, sorry, or India and China, where you have 2 largely antagonistic rivals continuing their border disputes and transforming them into wider armed rivalry, which could de-escalate and escalate over the decades. I think that should be the biggest concern of Armenians and Azerbaijanis, is that there's a risk of their conflict changing their space from once existed disputed piece of land into a large section of the border that solution to which requires, even hypothetical speaking, decades of negotiations and a lot of other things. For this to be prevented, I think, and also there exists a third thing, which is about connectivity, as in how to reconnect Armenia and Azerbaijan as two independent modern nation states, which so far doesn't exist, where so far doesn't exist any institutionalized form of negotiations. But I think we hope that it will emerge. I think at this point, personally for me, what's important is that these 3 things turn into the process. So we have peace agreement negotiations and their finalization and eventual signing. We have border making efforts, state-led, and also we have state-led connectivity issues. These 3 are, as of now, separate tracks. What is important is that they are turned into the one process that sometimes will be bringing little progress, sometimes will be bringing a lot of progress, but at the end of the day, will be there. will not be nullified once once in the future. And so there should be a continuous process of Armenian-Azerbaijani peacemaking. I mean, and obviously with current realities, it should happen on a top level with the involvement of the both Armenian and Azerbaijani state structures, because that is how you do. This is how you make borders. This is how you connect two states, and this is how you sign and establish diplomatic relationship. On the other hand, there exists the second biggest problem, which is, I think, the more chronic than the first one, is that even if the first is turned into the process, there exists a real high risk and a danger of this process staying and remaining only as narrow corridor, narrow lobby kind of diplomacy meetings, without going beyond the hotel rooms and the negotiation spaces, as in not making sense for the most of the population. And in that case, that would mean that Armenian-Azerbaijani peace will be contingent upon only on only on the top level decision makers of both countries. Um, Something like Egypt and Israel, or Jordan and Israel, or India, Pakistan, where you have peace treaties signed, but you have two societies remaining quite antagonistic each other. So their national identities got not transformed. National educations are still producing a generation of new people that hate the other side, basically. The other side is quite a problem for the South. Like in Egypt or Israel, you have a peace treaty since 1970s, mediated by the United States. You don't have any war as of now, and because two elites, Egyptian and Israeli, don't want to go for a war because of number of reasons. The one includes also possible US intervention of preventing such war. But doesn't mean that it doesn't translate into wider societal reconciliation between Egyptians and Israelis, which means, and which also should be a lesson for Armenia and Azerbaijan, that even if process is formulated and continues in the form of high-level negotiation between foreign ministers, deputy prime ministers, security system officials, diplomats, there's a risk that two societies will remain out of this discussion, which will be meaning that, practically speaking, there will be diplomatic relations without any relation between the societies. And for that to happen, there needs to be two-tier peacemaking efforts. One that includes state-led, more realist type of peace building, where you would focus on security, borders, diplomatic relations, conflict prevention, and mitigation, and also supplied and supported by also wider conflict transformation efforts that includes reimagining modern Armenian and modern Azerbaijani national identities in a new era of, let's say, quote unquote, post-Karabakh Azerbaijan and post-Karabakh Armenia. Also reimagining relation towards the other side, as in other is not vilified actor, enemy, but rather not a threat anymore. Revisiting history textbooks and so on, so media narrative discourses, so they could be also bottom-up supported process, not only top imposed.
Thank you, Shujaat. Reminder for those of you who just joined, there is a questions button. You can press on that and submit any questions you have. And let us move on to an area, to a field that really interests you, conflict transformation. So very briefly, what is conflict transformation? And how have conflict transformation approaches been or have not been applied in the Armenia-Azerbaijan context or Armenian-Azerbaijani context?
So conflict transformation is where you do not necessarily approach the conflict as something to be solved, as if you have something like a broken pencil, so you need to just tie it up or fix it. it is not as managing the conflict. It's not a solution for the conflict. It is just transforming attitudes, behaviors, and identities and perceptions that lead to violence or eruption of violence. And for this to happen, of course, the one of the effective tools for this is education. So education is a kind of toolkit for conflict transformation. The thing is, there have been many conflict transformation initiatives in Azerbaijan and Armenia, done largely by civil society actors. But but at the same time, the problem with the conflict transformation initiatives done by civil society actors is that most of the let's say problems, quote unquote, that make Armenian Azerbaijan reconciliation problematic or impossible as of today are structural problems in their nature. It is not a man-made, human-made problems. I mean, they are, but they are structural problems that would take agency of the actors within those structures. But most conflict transformation initiatives, activities, are designed by their nature, by their application, by their methodology, as agency-based interventions, which means that you prioritize critical education for oneself, for one person, or just a group of people. You prioritize critical theory application for a group of people, which does not mean that this application um, turn into wider structural change. So that is the biggest problem of the conflict transformation field done by the civil society. They remain only on the for the group of only few people. That doesn't necessarily translate into wider structural change.
All right. Um, so let's return back to borderlands and border regions. And, even since prehistoric times, we see often border regions becoming sort of trade hubs, zones of interaction, often prospering, and during wars and conflict, they suffer the most, often very acutely. Um, and how have Armenia's and Azerbaijan's borderlands been affected by the conflict? And can you envision any kind of a project that would help uh, people living in the towns and villages bordering the two states would mutually benefit in terms of economy, energy, resources?
I think first and foremost, we need to have um, borders demilitarized. So Azerbaijani Armenian borders are largely composed of um, compromise of trench military installations, front spider web of front lines that doesn't make any sort of intercommunal interaction possible, practically speaking, because how you would go from Azerbaijani village to the Armenian border, to the border with Armenia, when this border is full of military installations and landmines. So there is a huge issue. The first, I think it should be a bit gradual border making. First, you need to have clearly real realist way of border making. You need to have security arrangements that from now on this section, we transform our interactions into desecuritized manner in a way that there would be no military installation, but rather border installations, and the areas would be demined. And for this, I think there would be also a need for degree of international support for demining in terms of expertise and financing. Then comes the question of how you would envision the border in that specific part, which is a task of the border commissions. But I think after desecuritization, there's a very high need of incorporating uh, communal leaders, community members from both ends in border making efforts on a macro level. So on that perspective, for example, arranging a meeting of municipality leaders of village on both ends, where the border is being demarcated, would be a very good thing. So they could know each other first. There could be a locally created communication channel. For example, in case someone's cattle lost their way and made into Armenia, let's say. So how it could be returned? It could be returned by just directly communicating, because it's also loss of property, loss of financial resources. And there exists a lot of areas and over which also there exists an international crisis group report on what are the potential benefits, what could be the potential benefits and dividends of peace for these communities involved. There are a lot of areas which includes water reservoirs, resources, rivers, lakes, forestry, pastoral lands, agricultural lands that could be used jointly for the benefit of all communities and for the common betterment. On this end, I think this border making effort should be not only focusing on security issues, which obviously are necessary at this point, but also there needs to be more focus on uh, human-centered approach. As cliche as it may sound, but it is really needed, as in you have to have communal leaders, their representatives also being present on a micro level in making those borders in different parts of Armenia and Azerbaijan border, in the north, in the south, in the central part.
Wonderful. Let us go to our one of the questions. So this is from Hassan. Thank you both. I was wondering where refugees and IDPs stand when we talk about conflict transformation. Hassan Askarov.
I think so. Obviously, in the case of Armenia, Azerbaijan and Armenia went through a very unfortunate cycle of displacement in number of occasions. In if we go back to the very early of the 20th century, then you would also have another cycle added up of 980, 920. But the most, if the focus on most recent one, then you would have 90s and also the most recent ones. So there is a huge demographic change both in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia used to have the very big Azerbaijan minority that contributed a lot to Armenia's agriculture, Armenia's economy. It was the second biggest group after Armenians in Soviet Armenia. And that also that was the case with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was the second biggest state in terms of the number of people, that Armenians lived after Armenia. It was basically second homeland for Armenians. It was almost 500,000 people in the late 80s, in Baku, in Karabakh, in other parts of Azerbaijan. The long story short, there is a huge demographic change that happened in both countries, which in itself contributed a lot to the creation of modern national identities that are largely antagonistic toward each other. So there is a lot of Armenian Azerbaijanis of Armenia proper origin that played important role in the creation of a modern Azerbaijan national identity, modern Azerbaijan national identity after Karabakh War. And there's a lot of Armenians of Azerbaijan proper origin that also created a lot of that that contributed a lot to the creation of modern Armenian national identity after the Karabakh conflict vis-a-vis Azerbaijan. With that being said, I think at this point the question is whether what I was referring referring just a few minutes ago, which was wider societal reconciliation efforts, would bring any possible space for reversing these demographic shifts. As in, would that be possible for Azerbaijanis to return to Armenia or Armenians to return to Armenia, Azerbaijan, basically to their homeland, to their past homeland, as it was once envisioned, given local conditions would be conducive for such return, for such revitalization of bicommunal life. For that to happen, that's why what I was stressing just a few minutes ago is that we go for only just peace agreement oriented peace making between Armenia and Azerbaijan, then we wouldn't have this. For that to happen, we need to have a rather comprehensive sort of a hybrid peacemaking effort in which you would have a top diplomatic efforts going in parallel to wider societal reconciliation that would include a lot of things, including new national identity, new national education system, national histories, also transitional justice to a certain degree, and so on and so forth. So you could have a wider rapprochement that would make sort of possible return possible, literally possible, practically possible for the other side, so they could feel safe enough among their envisioned other, either Armenia or Azerbaijan.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And transitional justice is something I think we would have to start discussing more and more of. And it's one of the things that has really should resonate with this very long conflict. I have a more I have a question that's more to do with my own curiosity. So I was wondering what works on political theory or anything else has influenced you most.
Oh, well, I think, I mean, in terms of the conflict, I guess you're asking in conflict and conflict domain, this conflict status domain, then I would personally, I mean, I would say that, um, especially recent critical turn in conflict studies and peace studies, uh, is something that I personally took a lot of my both methodological and also theoretical notes for my own self and also for the thing that I'm doing for my communities involved, for the communities involved. So I would personally be, let's say, very um, I would identify myself as a good follower of the critical turn school of the conflict, critical turn in peace and conflict studies. Though I think I would say that the previous schools, such as the realist and liberal schools, played an important role in just opening different horizon for me in building up, let's say, my own conflict transformation interventions.
Yeah, with the current trajectory, do you think the liberal school will become a bit less popular among academics, or because of we're kind of in the post-liberal sort of world in some
Yeah,
ways, right? That
yeah.
was created in the 90s, so maybe we're moving a bit away from it, but I'm not sure. I'm not at all familiar with scholarship in this area.
So obviously there's I mean, so if we go over the different periods, then we have, of course, the Cold War type realist, let's say, realist school dominance across the globe. But again, when we're speaking of one school's dominance, doesn't mean that there was no other schools. There were others, but only one was quite dominant in global knowledge production. In the Cold War time, it was largely realist school. Then in the 90s, you had more turn on international neoliberal approach to including the conflict settlement. When you had economy focused approach, you have World Bank, international neoliberal institutions, neoliberal peace building, or also to a certain degree intervention, UN peacekeepers, Rwanda, Bosnia, Kosovo, Northern Ireland, this kind of neoliberal grand vistas, right? And obviously that 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 became something that um went through different crises. Some people trace it back to the 2003 Iraq. Some do with 2008 and aftermath of the aftermath. But I think the acute part of this crisis is happening as of today. So especially after 2022 Russian-Ukrainian war, and especially after the war in Gaza, we have basically unprecedented crisis of neoliberal order, which pushed neoliberal order and its institutions into the retreat on unprecedented scale and on global scale, which is happening basically at this point in the United States, so which has for a long time been regarded as the backbone of neoliberal international system. So when this international system is fracturing in its basically birthplace, to just use of cliche word, then it is a really sign that this system has failed. Of course, at this point, with re-emergence of anti-liberal or illiberal schools, to be more specific, populist, far-right, xenophobic, racist, and also quite important, also quite important rise of realist schools. Some people question whether there could be any sort of post-liberal order built, given there exists huge asymmetries, very big asymmetry in terms of the power that that uh, um, uh, anti-illiberal schools have against post-liberal uh, post-liberal uh, post-liberal schools. So with that in mind, of course, then you have the question is, what could be the best solution for this crisis? I think some people are mentioning that. In this case, the best case scenario would be, I mean, this is just a proposal, by some critical thinkers, is that here the best case scenario would be having a bit of tactical alliance between liberal liberal proponents and protagonists of liberal schools with the post-liberals, so they could be first joined against anti-liberal schools, but it's more of a philosophical debate. I don't know whether it will take us to anywhere. But I think what is clear at this point is that the post-liberal, neoliberal order is in such a crisis that, and if it succeeds, I mean, if this crisis becomes enormous in the United States, I don't think that they will be ever come back to the neoliberal order from now on. So it is not just a one man, let's say one man made, uh, let's say havoc brought upon institutions, right? It is a systemic change and transformation happening, and if this becomes a continued thing, then there's a risk that you will not have these institutions re-emerging anytime from now on.
Thank you for those interesting insights. I believe that was we had only that one previous question in the question box. Shujaat, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone. This was Garden Chat number 16. We were joined by Shujaat Ahmadzada. We discussed his family background, the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, of course, also by extension, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and also his thoughts on conflict transformation and politics in general and the world. Thank you so much to whoever joined. This will be available here for you to watch. We will also post it on different platforms, including YouTube and social media, or excerpts of it. So thank you, everyone. Have an amazing Nowruz season. Happy Nowruz to everyone. And please follow us back and come back for our next Garden Chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.